Welcome to Transform Now, a podcast focused on intelligent automation and brought to you by SS&C Blue Prism. On this program, we talk about how organizations globally are rethinking the way they operate, utilizing process orchestration and AI-enabled digital workers to free up humans to do the work that matters most. We also share insights and tips on how you can embrace this new way of working and unleash your full potential. Let's get into the show.
Hello, everyone. I'm Michael Marchuk. Welcome to the Transform Now podcast. On this episode, I have a special guest, Lauren Vriens, who's the VP of Growth and Strategy at Accenture. Lauren is an outspoken advocate for generative AI. In fact, if you've watched any of her videos on LinkedIn, you've probably seen her exercising and talking to you at the same time, which is amazing. She's also started a startup called Revel, grew from nothing to $50 million. Currently, she's working at Accenture, helping to build startup incubators inside large corporate clients, which we'll talk about a little bit later, as well as building AI products inside of Accenture too. Lauren is a busy lady. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to chat.
I'm excited that you're here to chat too. So aside from walking all around San Francisco and New York telling us about AI, tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Yeah, that's quite a lot of my time to be in it. I like to
run aimlessly around New York and roll
Yeah.
videos on AI, huh?
Exactly. It's maybe a weird hobby, but like staying up to speed on all the AI products that are coming to market and different tactics people are employing, trying all of the products myself, and then trying to translate that into something actionable for business leaders on LinkedIn and Twitter and stuff like that. So I know that's strange, but that's actually a hobby of mine. I do other things. I play volleyball. I go out to dinner with friends and things like that as well.
Very good. So your background is not necessarily in technology to start with. So can you give us a head start of how you started out and how you got to where you are now?
Yeah, I would call it maybe a circuitous path, but it took me until like my late 20s to realize tech was where I wanted to be. And part of that was just because the rapid pace of innovation. I read Elon Musk's biography back then and was just so fascinated by what is the big potential there. And so I had been working in the energy industry, in the public sector as well, developing policy, helping regions of the world shift from reliance on coal power to natural gas and to renewables and things like that. And everything was just 100-year timelines. Like when you're talking to utilities, it's like large investments. It takes a lot of time. It's really challenging. And then I saw what was happening in the tech sector and things were just moving so fast. And I was like, I want to go there. So I transitioned into that, mainly starting with Revel, but the role I had before that was helping Canadian startups expand into the US market or US investors find Canadian startups to invest in as well.
Gotcha. So you've done a bunch of different things in different industries. And certainly everyone listening to this podcast will understand no matter what industry you're in, it's all about technology now, right? More specifically, as we're seeing now, even more generative AI. That's like the big thing that everyone's into right now, and for good reason, I think. So looking at across the industry, as you've seen the uneven adoption of AI across different sectors, what are the barriers that are preventing some of these smaller companies or maybe less tech-savvy organizations from adopting AI? And is there any way they can overcome that?
Yeah, there's a couple issues. I think the main one I see is essentially overwhelm or like a lack of a overarching strategy. There are a million fires going on in any company at any given time. And it's which one should you try and fix with AI and which one shouldn't you? It's fundamentally, I like to think of it as a matching problem. You have the bottlenecks in your organization that are preventing you from growth, from reducing costs, from actually delivering your product, whatever that is, or service. And then it's like, what are AI's actual capabilities today? And what I've seen a lot of consulting firms start offering is this AI opportunity assessment. And so that helps companies try and distill the madness into, okay, what's the ROI? Which initiative should we start with? What's going to actually work for us rather than just throwing money at a problem and building something nobody wants. And I would add that this is just like a side note, but some of the ways I've seen companies win with AI, and I'm talking smaller companies in particular, recently is in tech development. So helping to accelerate how quickly your developers can turn something around and your product managers can define requirements, that sort of thing. I know Gumroad just released a case study saying they increased the speed with which they can release features by 300%, which is pretty significant. And the other opportunity I've seen is in sales. And HubSpot themselves I saw this in a podcast, but HubSpot, I think they said they saw a 70% increase in conversion from email campaigns just by using AI to personalize them. And so tech development and sales are like two really big opportunities. There's more, but those are like the two that seem to be like easy wins for folks.
So it sounds
The other H, yeah.
Go ahead. I was going to ask you the one thing, it sounds like that the differences you have between the big guys and the small guys they're just shrinking because of the capabilities of generative AI. So let's finish your idea, but I want to go back to that because I think it's important that we delve into that a little bit.
Yeah, I'll run with that thread for just a second
Oh,
because Sam Altman has predicted that there will be a unicorn company with one employee. And so the gap between it used to be you needed lots of employees to deliver, and now you might need fewer employees because you can augment them with AI. And so small companies, oftentimes their limitation is capital. And so this kind of shrinks that. AI products are a lot faster, cheaper, et cetera, to deploy. And so that's the theory. I think the hard part is in the execution.
yeah, I can imagine. We start talking about execution now, and this is something that I know you've mentioned on one of your videos, and we wanted to talk about this. And you highlight this idea of AI tourists, where users are dabbling in the AI. You mentioned it yourself, you trying all kinds of tools and whatnot. What are the risks that this superficial engagement or adoption of AI presents to organizations who are really trying to either both find their direction but also apply that to get some real benefits?
Yeah. So the angle I'll take with this question is internal tools. A lot of companies are thinking about how to increase the productivity of their employees. And so they build an AI tool, or maybe they even acquire an AI tool and then they release it, and then there's crickets. And so that's your AI tourist problem. People might try it, but then they don't really understand how to work it into their daily life, or it doesn't really do what they expected, et cetera, et cetera. And so they abandon it. And then you've wasted a lot of money. And so what I recommend to companies is that they actually need to think in terms of a startup, in terms of releasing a new product, which means you start actually with user research interviews. So what are the pain points people are experiencing? What are the biggest challenges in their day-to-day work? And Accenture actually did this. I was part of this project where we interviewed dozens, if not almost 100 people across the organization to understand what were their big bottlenecks so that we could design in-house tools for them that actually solved their problems. And the tricky thing I would say there is that if you ask people what they want, they don't necessarily know what AI is capable of. So they might say, we've ChatGPT, but that might not be the thing that really drives full productivity. Of course, it can be an accelerator, but there might be more specialized tools that would be more helpful. But yeah, so I think that's the number one thing is thinking through what are the actual problems you want to solve and then go solve them. And then the second piece is, and I know this term is out of fashion, I don't know what the new term is, but change management. So a lot of companies are just releasing these products and not thinking about how to get employees to feel comfortable with them. And that's on two levels. One is help them understand how it can like sit within their workday and what's the trigger for them to think about using it. Is it connected into existing tools that they already use? Is it easy to find, et cetera? But there's also an emotional component. There's a lot of hesitation with AI from a lot of employees because they're like, this is going to replace my job. And so there's I don't know what you would call it, but like an undercurrent there of resistance. And so in order to get people to adopt AI, you oftentimes have to do a form of training, but it's even like a listening exercise. What are people concerned about? Helping them understand how this will actually make their job better or easier, or help them get to that next level of promotion, because now they don't have to spend all their time doing the nitty gritty drudge work, and like actually taking a personal approach to implementing AI in your company.
So I have a question because you talk about interviewing employees and finding out their pain points, but they may not necessarily know the capabilities of AI. And so the thing that ran through my mind is you're asking a bunch of people who are, say, carrying heavy rocks from point A to point B, and you start asking what their pain points are, and they start telling you that they're getting calluses in their hands. And it's really a challenge because they got a lot of calluses in my hands. And so one aspect of that is, well, I can develop some gloves then that'll protect your hands. That would take care of the pain point. but it wouldn't necessarily say, actually, if we used a cart, it'd be way better, right? So how do you get to the point where you're able to go beyond just my pain point is the calluses in my hands and the carrying these heavy rocks to actually, you need to think completely differently about this. How do you approach that within an organization?
This is a really hard challenge, especially because the pace of change is insanely fast. So what AI can do today is it's going to be different in 6 months, maybe 3 months. We actually don't really know. And so I keep thinking about that phrase where it's like if you asked people what they wanted back in the 1800s, when you're talking about transportation, they would have just said a faster horse rather than like
Right.
a car. And so there is a lot of processes, and this is something that my team at Accenture does that you can deploy in terms of getting really creative with solutioning. So opening that space for complete off the wall, blue sky brainstorming. Wouldn't it be cool if we could do X? And so not jumping to the first conclusion on what could solve the problem, but getting really expansive and bringing a lot of interesting people with diverse backgrounds into a room to really brainstorm what could be possible. And then creating like quick and dirty prototypes, like even if it's just a Figma design, you don't have to go build the whole thing and then go back and test that with your users and see how they respond to it. And so it's more upfront work, right? But it tends to result in a better outcome at the end.
That makes sense. And Figma being a wireframing tool to allow you to do these kind of test runs. So let's talk about data, because this is something that's been a sore point for a long time for a bunch of different reasons. First of all, was, hey, we have too much data. Hey, we don't know how to get to our data. Hey, we got piles of data. We're not sure how we can get through it all. And now we've got all these piles of data that we've been trying to sort through. And now we have this new concept of leveraging generative AI to dive into that data and learn more about our customers and about ourselves and our processes and whatnot. This can be a challenge. How do we make sure that these AI implementations that these organizations are trying to put together are actually leveraging data that's useful?
Yeah, this is a really great question. I'll give a so ChatGPT has a memory feature. I've had access to it for maybe 6 or 8 months. And so it's collecting information about me constantly. And even now, only 6 months later, some of the memories it has on me are completely obsolete. They don't apply anymore. And so it's now on me to go through and deprecate some of that data and delete it and groom it, et cetera. And that same challenge extends to organizations. So if you build, let's say, an internal chatbot that has a knowledge base that your employees can use to find information, ask questions, et cetera, you also want to have a plan for how are you going to keep that knowledge base up to date. And this problem is going to just expand because now we're talking like as context windows expand, now we're talking about giving it access to almost like live data. So emails, chat history, PowerPoints, just the knowledge base of your company in general. I would actually recommend against that because maintaining that data is going to be incredibly complicated. And so a lot of people aren't thinking necessarily 6 months or 1 year in advance, but you have to have a data retention strategy. So what are you going to do to keep that information? And this is also, I think, a point against training your own model. So some companies are like, we have such a hyper specific use case. We're just going to train our own model on our own data. But once you give data to a model, it's really hard to back that data back out. And there have been studies that have shown that just prompting a model, a general use model, can get you the same results as training your own model. That might change in the future, but that's where we are today. And so sometimes I would push companies to think, what can we do with just like a knowledge-based plus prompting and like a general AI LLM versus let's make our own special model with all the data that we have.
It's interesting you go down that path. So I'll pull on that string a little bit too. We start talking about LLMs and general use LLMs. We're moving into this whole agentic space where we're concept of AI agents who have capabilities to perform specific things, to have specific knowledge bases. Do you foresee in the way you've seen with your clients that sort of aspect being something that they're leading towards now or looking for in the future? Or is this something that you're seeing that, hey, it's still too new to even look at and we would just stick with the LLMs right now because the whole small language model or the quantized LLMs that are really specific and useful on a particular device or set of devices aren't necessarily there yet?
Yeah, so this is a good question. I think if your company has not yet dabbled in AI, start small. Start simple, start with a customer success bot that's actually good and trained on your knowledge base. Experiment with it, get comfortable, make sure you have the right tech team in place who are paying attention to what's evolving as well and can build things that have some sort of flexibility. And so for an example, there was a day when or a couple days when Sam Altman was ousted by his board and ChatGPT started malfunctioning. And we were in the middle of building an entire product that used ChatGPT. And so we were suddenly panicking, right? And so that introduced the idea of, oh, you should have multi-model flexibility built in so that you can switch to another model if one model goes down. And so thinking through what are the weak points and addressing those as you go is probably smart. But to go back to your question, I think, actually, can you remind me of your question? I could tangent there.
We're talking about specific large language models, which are like, omnipresent knowledge, right? So they know everything about Paris, France, and about the Louvre, but they don't know anything necessarily specifically about the products that you have that you sell, right? So you're asking a very broadly trained model about something very specific, which it may have some knowledge of, but maybe not the in-depth knowledge that perhaps particularly trained agent, an AI, a small language model might be better at. So we start looking at building the two together. Is it better to say, hey, listen, that whole small language model thing and training your own data, we're not necessarily there yet, or that's a good direction to go when we get there? Or as you mentioned earlier, do we stay with a large language model that is trained on a whole bunch of data because it can give you better responses?
I haven't personally tested the difference between a small language model and a large language model with a trained small language model with a large language model and a knowledge base. But I'd say for most of the use cases that exist today in a company, it's the LLMs are so smart and you might as well use that with like highly sophisticated prompting and with a really good, solid knowledge base, which doesn't mean throw everything in there, but be really deliberate about what's in your knowledge base. And something that also can be a useful tool is something called a data glossary. So every company has their own lingo, even different departments within a company have acronyms that mean different things, but are the same acronym. And so how is your large language model supposed to know that? It doesn't, right? That's internal company knowledge. But you can create something called a data glossary that defines those terms. And that's something that you can put in the knowledge base. And then now the LLM has that knowledge as well and can reference it when it's relevant. So those are some of the tactics you can use to really customize your LLM-based product.
Gotcha. So all the other thing that comes to mind too is the application when we talk about, are we using the proverbial hammer to kill a fly type of thing? Is it possible that maybe large language models, as capable as they are, could be too costly to run for some specific types of work? Are we throwing everything at Gen AI right now because it's the newest, coolest thing? Or is there a way we can segment what is really either traditional AI, leveraging traditional rules analytics kind of models, versus actually need an LLM? How would you advise an organization who's building that internal capability right now?
It really depends on the use case. So if it's one of the common use cases that companies are using AI for, so that's like your dev team, maybe your customer support reps, maybe an internal tool to help people do their work faster, I'd say generally stick with the tools that are available in the market. Don't get too custom. And just because your speed, like what's important here is speed to release, not necessarily build, because if you spend too long, I think thinking and customizing and et cetera, the market's already moving, new products already emerging. So the best thing to do is release quickly and then get people to test and provide feedback and refine as you go. So again, like thinking like a startup. But then there's always like really custom use cases. If you're Bloomberg terminal and you have like vast quantities of data and you really want to provide tools to the traders that are looking at that data, then you're probably going to do something custom. But they're probably like, there might be an LLM front end, but they're probably using machine learning actually to ingest a lot of that data and make sense of that data. The LLMs aren't great at math, just to be clear. I know we're like so impressed now that O1 can count the number of R's in strawberry, but it still struggles. And so that gets, when you're talking about vast quantities of financial data and things like that, it's actually probably better to explore machine learning first And then an LLM can be your natural language layer on top that allows people to like ask questions in a natural way.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. So let's talk about that adoption piece again, because this is something you're doing as part of what you do within Accenture. When you go into an organization who may be, let's call them, I would say legacy, but someone who's got a long legacy in terms of their existence. They've been a bank that's been around for 120 years. They've been an insurance company that's been around for 100 years. They may not necessarily be moving as quick as some of the fintechs or insurtechs are, right? How do you help them see how this might benefit them without cannibalizing their current infrastructure or current knowledge base of people that are within the organization?
That's a very multi-part
I'm
question.
sorry. I just kept on stream of consciousness. It's coming out.
Yeah. What I find so interesting though is that I worked with a high net worth financial services company, more of a legacy, I'd say, company a few years ago. And they were having issues with their customer support reps and their account managers, like not responding quick enough to these high net worth individuals. And so we explored kind of building chatbots and things like that. 'Cause chatbots have been around for a long time. But at that time, it would have cost more to build and customize this chatbot than it would have been to just hire more customer support reps. And so that math has completely changed now. So the speed with which, if you and I wanted to create a chatbot on the transcript of this podcast, we could do it in 5 minutes and probably for free, I think. And so
I'm not even going to go
I
into the whole Google Notebook LM thing, which has got my job at it. It is crosshairs at the moment.
exactly. So I think it becomes an easier sell for companies, even if they're legacy companies, because you're like, hey, you don't have to spend that much to do this. You might need to hire some consultants to help you think it through, or some external tech teams to execute against it, but it's still going to be a lot cheaper than it was a few years ago.
How do you get past we'll call it the bias, but the inertia that these organizations have towards technology? Because as in all reality, it's likely that these organizations have seen their System 36 from the 1970s come and go, to be replaced by this, to be replaced by that, this is just the next thing, right? And so being a laggard from their perspective is, hey, I can still run my company on whatever we call ancient technology these days. And we can still run it on that because there's going to be something new coming out later. And I'm just going to wait and see. How do you break that kind of inertia and allow them to see potentially either the risks of not doing it or the benefits of really going into it as like a startup?
Yeah, it's the phrase comes to mind, the not the early bird gets the worm, but the second mouse gets the cheese. I think that might describe that mentality that you're thinking of. I generally like in my conversations with CEOs, most of them recognize that they need to get on board with AI. I think where the inertia actually comes from is lower in their organizations. And so there's a lot of people that I've even seen managing super successful, super senior managing directors at Accenture say, oh, if AI can fix PowerPoints, like what is my job now? And so there's definitely fear there where AI will replace us. And I think to give an anecdote that maybe provides people some comfort is it was a series of transcripts of user research interviews that I had done to Claude, one of the AI tools, and asked it to extract the key insights for a product. And and I'm reading through them and I'm like, actually, it missed all the things that I thought were important in that conversation. And the reason is that AI still doesn't, like, LLMs are not real time for the most part. They don't have full context that you are operating in. And they also still have needle in the haystack challenges. So they have a hard time finding that one piece of information in a vast sea of information that is relevant and important. And if you have, I'd say, deep industry knowledge or expertise or just lived experience, you will still outperform an LLM. And even if OpenAI gets to PhD level intelligence, which they say they are close, if not already there, for most jobs, you're not actually hiring PhDs. PhDs, they talk a lot, they think a lot. They don't necessarily have a bias towards action. Organizations are fundamentally a collection of people moving towards a goal. And you still need people to motivate people. And you still need people to provide vision and direction. And LLM it's all regressive, right? It's all looking in the past. It's all regurgitating past information. It's not necessarily looking towards the future. It can if prompted the right way, but that's not its default behavior. And that's where humans and our creativity, I think, play in. And so to go back, a long-winded answer, but to go back to your question, the key is helping not just like the CEOs, I think, understand that this is do or die. It's the rest of their organization needs to understand that they still have a lot of value and maybe even rethinking their value. It's not about how many emails can you respond to and how many PowerPoints can you create, because all that stuff can now be done with AI. It's how can you be a strategic thinker and how can you motivate people and get people moving in the right direction and understand what's happening in the market and think I was going to say 5, 10 years out, but that's
5
almost
months
impossible
ahead.
now. Yes, 5 months ahead, 1 year ahead, maybe two, a genius, and getting more in that habit. And that's truly your value.
Actually, that's sort of where I wanted to go with this. And as with AI, we're seeing all this amazing stuff here. But as you mentioned, people are still important within an organization for a number of different reasons. And we look at, let's just go back. So someone gets hired out of college and they're an accountant, for example, and they've got all these skills they believe they were taught within their business school. And they go to their first job and they basically have to learn all over again how to work with those skills they were taught, but now in context of the organization. And as that potentially that student then goes through their 10 years, assuming that it's even a thing these days, of life within that organization, they've built up certain skills and certain understanding about how our customers work, how our internal processes work, how to get things done. And they start internalizing that to a point where you can ask them things with strategically. They can think that way, but they're still in the method and the mode of doing the tactile activities, which are the PowerPoints and the Excel spreadsheets and all the other things. So how do we transition? What's the secret to transitioning? And I know the secret just to keep it from all us, but what's the secret of moving from this tactical viewpoint that employees have to really seeing their strategic value on a personal level? And how do managers get that out?
I'm really glad you brought this up because I'm actually very passionate about this topic. I've
I'm glad you
seen,
are. And I want you to keep talking on it then.
yeah, I've seen a decrease in hiring for entry level positions because now it's like the grunt work can be done by your middle managers, but with AI. So it's not really expanding their workload. They don't necessarily need to pass something off to an entry level employee. I think this is a really short sighted view because who are going to be your managers in 10 years? If you no longer have entry level people coming into your funnel and learning about the organization and learning what's important and the market, et cetera. And so I think we need to start shifting towards apprenticeship models or even chief of staff type of models where we're still hiring entry level people, but we're training them not in how to do a PowerPoint. We're training them in how to think. They're shadowing senior leaders. They're maybe doing special projects. And then they're also being, I think, trained in how to be augmented with AI. I hope, I believe this is happening in universities today where students are learning how to use AI to do their work. And so they still will need to learn, but that's like how to write an essay, right? But they still need to learn how to apply AI in the context of the workforce. And if we can get people in that are kind of generation AI, right? They're already thinking about it constantly. How do you automate? How do you leverage AI? Then that'll, I think, have outsized impacts on a company's growth in 5 years, in 10 years. And so I would recommend that companies rethink their recruiting out of colleges. And it's not just, I know we think that entry level kids, like they have to suffer, they have to learn the hard way, they have to put in those long hours and whatever. But I'm like, that's not actually what's going to get you to the next phase. It's actually teaching people how to think in this new world, having them learn deep subject matter expertise from a young age, and then be able to move like almost like like leadership training programs, right? Being able to move up the organization that way.
So that it sounds easier said than done. What would you say were the top maybe 3 tactical things an organization can do to change their thinking towards that?
Yeah. So a lot of organizations already have, and maybe this is the larger ones, but I'm sure mid-sized ones do as well. But they have like internship programs, or they have college recruitment programs and things like that. they will typically bring someone in and then just drop them into the fire. Maybe there's onboarding, whatever, but it's okay. Now you have a scope of work. You must now deliver X amount of stuff and you'll be evaluated on that. And if you fight hard enough and you're good enough, maybe you get promoted. And that's like the trajectory. I think an alternative pathway is bringing in your entry level people and having them work directly with your senior leaders, being their shadow, being their chief of staff. And I think and I had that luck, I think, early on in my career where I served as chief of staff for a very senior person. And the amount of information you can learn in a very short amount of time on what's important to the organization, how to think, how to make decisions is really valuable. So it's like they used to start here, but now you actually want to bring them up here. And the requirements of what you're asking them is not, hey, create this PowerPoint. It's learn these skills and contribute where you can and that sort of thing. So that's why I like to say like a shadow program or an apprenticeship program, that type of thing.
That makes sense. That makes sense. I know most colleges these days, we actually spoke with a couple professors on this podcast regarding how they are building out today's generation of students. And oftentimes they are saying, yeah, we're giving them heavy duty projects that are related to building out business cases and even operating them. So they are getting that. What I'm wondering about, though, is you have two angles of this. One is they've done these really cool projects in college and they're really excited to jump into the workforce. And the first thing they're asked to do is we're going to have you do PowerPoint cleanup for all these people for the next X amount of time. And it deflates them. Or you have the opposite, which is I've never been exposed to that. And here I am in an organization that's running quickly and I'm not sure I can keep up with it. So I think you got both angles of it there.
Yeah.
How would you talk with or advise the HR teams for their onboarding what would that look like to help get a company to bring in and see this new talent for what it could be?
Yeah, you definitely touched on something important where there is a part of the younger generation that are entering the workforce who feel disengaged because the skills that they have, even if it's just 2, 3, 5 years, are now changing rapidly. And they weren't necessarily taught about it or how to apply AI, and they feel left behind and a little bit worried about what their future might entail. And I hate suggesting like corporate training because everyone hates corporate training, but it's necessary. And there is a demand for it. There's a lot of employees that are like, I want to learn and understand AI so that I can be part of the wave. And then there's the employees that are feeling very threatened by AI. And so it's helping them see why they should engage with AI and how it can be helpful for them and that it'll actually make them more valuable to a company in the future rather than just replacing their skills. But yeah, it's at full direction here. I would say move away from the click through a video type of training and make it cohort based. Make it, you're talking with people, you're engaging with people. My little practice at Accenture did this for training on new material. We actually brought everyone in person and we had interactive exercises. We even forced teams of people to go down the street and do live user research interviews at the Trader Joe's, down the street to learn how to do user research interviews and things like that. And it was a lot of fun. People got connected. People could ask questions. It was very engaging. I know this is challenging for really large companies, but there's always micro groups, right, that can take the lead and really engage people. Because a lot of it is that people just want to vocalize their concerns and they want to feel heard before they get on board with something. So I would say make it more human, not less.
Gotcha. I like that. Being more human is always a good thing. So final question for you is, what's inspiring you these days?
Good question. I'm very intrigued by agents, AI agents, and their ability to do actions for you. And I think what's actually inspiring to me, though, is all the startups that I've met that are building really novel applications in that space. And I think ChatGPT took the world by storm. And then they released some updates and they killed a whole generation of startups. It was it became a meme. It was killed by ChatGPT because they released things like PDF upload and then Chat PDF started to hurt and things like that. And so I think there was a lot of fear and hesitation for a little bit with such a big, well-capitalized leader in the market and there's others, right? It's not just them. Can the startup still compete? And what I'm so enthusiastic about or inspired by is the startups that I've met and the CEOs and founders I've met who really do have a novel perspective and are thinking years in advance. So they're not thinking about to solve the problem today. They're thinking about how to solve the problem that'll exist in 3 years. And it's so fascinating. It's really fascinating.
I imagine it would be very difficult to imagine 3 years in advance, but I've spoken with several futurists, and it's interesting to see how they think and the way that they're positioning future state stuff. Always interesting about that. Lauren, I want to say thank you for sharing your insights and some of your comments you had today, because you get some really interesting viewpoints that I think a lot of people will appreciate. So thank you for joining us today on Transform Now.
Thanks for having me, Michael. This is a lot of fun.
Thank you for listening to Transform Now, the podcast from SS&C Blue Prism. You can find all of our episodes on your favorite podcast channel, as well as YouTube. To stay on top of the hottest topics in the world of intelligent automation, subscribe now. The future of work is here.